Thank you for joining me today. I am going to be talking about a more extended version of building a preparedness pantry food storage for a longer period of time. As you know, if you've taken the Preparedness Pantry Masterclass, I typically talk about having supplies on hand for somewhere between 14 to 30 days. But a number of you have asked about longer term storage. So I decided to bring in a friend of mine who knows more about that than I do from a personal perspective. And so I'm delighted to introduce you to my dear friend and colleague, Nicole Vincent, who is an amazing energy worker, body worker, emotion code worker, all the things.
All the
And
things.
and Nicole also happens to be a member of the Latter-day Saints community, and their faith tradition encourages preparedness, what they call provident living. And so Nicole's going to share with us. Nicole, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I am super excited to share the knowledge. I am not an expert in this field, but maybe more so than I know because it's just been part of my life. So it's not, but sometimes, those gifts or those things that just are there, we don't realize they're gifts until we're like, oh, somebody else doesn't do this. Oh, okay. So hopefully I can share some tips and tricks that can help those looking to have a little bit longer term storage.
No, that sounds great. And so I'd love to start by asking, how old were you when you began to be aware of the fact that your family was putting food by and living in that way?
Actually, like my parents really struggled with finances when I was young. And so that didn't really happen until I was a little bit older. I'm the oldest of four kids. And so my mother-in-law actually is like, when I saw what her food storage was, I was like flabbergasted because she literally had a grocery, like a room in her house that was like a grocery store. And she had like aisles and,
Wow.
like she still does to this day. And she is a single woman with, no kids living with her. But when I saw that, I was like, oh my gosh, like what? Like I know they taught it at church, but I never saw it in action until I saw my mother-in-law. And I was very young when I got married. I was 20. So it's been 25 years of seeing her. And she is like that woman. That is her legacy is food storage. So I knew it was something we were supposed to do, but I knew that we didn't really have the money. And looking back, like I could see where it probably could have been a priority, but there were other things in my parents' life that took priority over that at the time. But it was definitely on my radar that we needed to have it from a very young age.
Mm-hmm. And so once you came into being exposed to your mother-in-law and her storage, how did that help you begin to build your own plan?
So we were young, newlyweds. So we didn't have a lot of money. We were just starting out. Um, but I would just and I'm going to put in a disclaimer here. A lot of the tips might not be Mira approved, but thankfully there's a lot of options that are like better packaging and better, better options. Like they might not be ideal, but we're talking emergency storage here, people. So just keep that in mind. But I would start.
This is a no judgment zone. This is
Okay, good. Because I'm like,
yeah, no, I'm not sitting here. I'm not going to sit here and pick apart and go, why didn't you do that? Like, no.
you're good. You're good. But once I saw my mother-in-law, and because she was not, she was probably just as poor as my parents were, but this was something for her that was very important, that she felt very like in her soul that she needed to do. And so I started just adding a few extra cans of tuna or different canned foods or something that was, shelf stable to my grocery list every week. I really got into couponing. And this doesn't really apply anymore in 2023, but because couponing is almost all digital now. But I got into couponing, and so I would look for sales, and I would pay attention to the grocery cycles. They would go on quarterly cycles where you could get stuff on sale, and so when that something that we would eat would go on sale, I would stock up.
Mhm.
and just be and do it in a very economical way. And some of the pictures I have, like, it's like, how can you eat that many Pop-Tarts? Like, we didn't even like Pop-Tarts, but guess what? I got them free with coupons. And so, like, I had so many in it, like a lot of it was junk food. So you have to be careful. I'm definitely more discerning now, but I would just start adding a little bit every week, just a little extra. So I wasn't spending a lot. But what happened is that as I did that, and as I just bought a little bit every week, and I slowly built my store, in 2008, my husband was laid off unexpectedly. And we were a single income household at the time. And our food storage really tightened us, like, it really helped lessen the blow so that we could rely on that and not spend money on that. We could have money to pay our mortgage and our electricity bill. And we didn't necessarily need it in an actual, like, natural disaster emergency like you've experienced, like with flooding or a hurricane. But it saved us. And
Mhm.
I do it a little different now, but that principle of just getting a little bit every week and just adding just $5 or $10, or it might be more with inflation now, but adding just a little bit every week when you go to the grocery store can really, like, add up
Mhm.
faster than you think.
And so can you share for us, like, what is the guiding philosophy for the LDS community behind why you store and how much you're supposed to store?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that it in our faith, we're really taught to be self-reliant.
Mm.
That not necessarily, not in the fact that, hey, I don't need other people, but we want to be able to take care of our own needs and not be a burden on others, and be able to bless others. And so when I'm storing stuff, like, I'm not just thinking about what my family will need. I'm thinking about, well, I might not need this item, but I can either, share it with my neighbor, or maybe if society totally collapses and we go on a barter system, like, I could barter for something. But it's really about that self-reliance and being prepared for whatever happens. Because there
Mhm.
could be a natural disaster. You could lose a job. Maybe the breadwinner gets sick and no longer can provide, and your income goes drastically down. Like, there's so many situations where having just a few extra months of food storage can really tide you over. Because if you think about how much you spend on food, and a lot of us spend more than we actually need to spend, right? Like, when I'm talking food storage, you're not eating bonbons all the time. Like, this is like just to keep you alive. um,
Yeah.
but it really can lessen that burden, where you might only just need to be getting, some fresh produce here and there, are just those fresh things that you can't store, right? You can't store milk or eggs for days on end. Like, yes, you can get powdered versions for extreme emergencies, but in our faith, like, the tradition has been a year supply.
Mhm.
um Not like, a lot of times, with depending on your housing situation, that might not be physically a reality, right? I live in Texas. My mom lives in Utah. They build houses with basements that have rooms specific for food storage.
Wow.
So, like, I go to my mom's, and she's got this, like, amazing, like, storage in her basement that's cold. This temperature is nice and cool all year round. I live in Texas. Like, if it's not in my air conditioned house, like, it's gonna get spoiled. And so,
Right.
so we have to get creative with actual physical places to store it, because that is a concern. So right now, like, the current teaching is have at least 3 months.
Mhm.
Have at least 3 months, a year if you have the space and the
Right.
financial means to do it. So for our family, for example, several years ago, we purchased, just to make it easy. And so we could just, like, cross that worry off our list, is we um, purchased a whole package for a family of 5 of like the, number 10 cans, the freeze dried stuff, um, and dehydrated things. And it sits in a closet. It doesn't get touched. It's good for 25 years and I don't have to worry about it. I hope
Right.
I never have to use it. I would love if I could just throw that away and I never have to use it. But the peace of mind is that it's there if something happened and I couldn't get to the grocery store, like, and we have water storage and things like that,
Mhm.
to compensate for that, because it does take a lot of water.
Yes.
But being mindful and just having a plan and what works for you, like you have to think of the logistics of it too. But something is better than nothing as far as food storage.
Sure.
You know, just like,
Sure.
2 weeks to 30 days. I asked one time on social media, I was like, if you lost connection, like you couldn't get to a grocery store, how long could you survive with the food in your house? I was flabbergasted. People were like 3 days, a week. I was like, are you kidding me? Like, that blew my mind. To me, that is abnormal, but that's my experience, right? Because
Well, and the other thing is, let's not forget that in the last few years here in Texas, we have had significant supply chain issues.
yes, that's
We
very
got
true.
pummeled by a hurricane and a massive flood. We had the great snowpocalypse where the entire power grid shut down, and that caused an issue.
Yes.
And then, of course, we had supply chain issues. And even now, 2023, I go to, like the other day, I was at the grocery store and I saw one of the grocery store clerks rearranging the shelves to pull everything up to the front and line it up. What was behind it was empty, but they want to make the shelves look full.
Yep.
You know, there are still things that are not getting through. Now, granted, it was Pringles and I don't eat those, but you know, there are other
Yep.
areas where they have other foods that may be happening to as well. And if you have a preparedness pantry, you also are able to ride out any of those supply chain shortages because you have what you need for X amount of time.
Exactly. Exactly. It's planning ahead a little bit, right?
Mhm.
Just, even if it's just like an extra trip to Costco and, getting some of the canned lentils or, whatever, something that you'll actually eat. It might not have to, like, typically most of my food storage is not things that are my favorite that I'm like, oh yes, I want to eat that. But will it keep me alive in an emergency? Yes.
Mhm.
And so, and making sure that you're rotating the food. Um,
Yes.
I
So
went,
important. So
it's
important to
so
make sure.
important. I like, I don't put a lot of weight on expiration dates that they have to put on labels. That's just my personal philosophy, but there are some things that, like, you just, you're kind of rolling the dice if you're, eating it past the expiration date. But um, but you want to rotate it so you're not being wasteful, right?
Yeah.
We don't want to have a wasteful mentality, but at the same time, like, be mindful, like plan ahead just a little bit. And it's amazing what you can accumulate and have on hand when needed. Something that I have a lot of friends that do this as a tradition is twice a year when our church just does their general conference, which is typically in October and April, which is just a time marker. Basically, you can pick whatever 2 times a year works for you, but they will go and they'll have like a food storage like day where they just have all their meals out of food storage. And so that starts getting stuff rotated a little bit and helps them kind of check in to see, okay, where are the dates, where can we rotate stuff, and just kind of makes it fun. And see, let's depending on your
How
kids,
many days can you eat
get
out of your
creative.
pantry kind of thing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it really is just, it's just having it on your radar and being mindful and just putting a little bit of planning and effort into it.
And I love that you talked about the fact that you do have some longer term storage things. I will share that some of those are actually really tasty and are good to rotate in. I think the biggest challenge is it's a large can. So if you're not a
Yep.
large family, then you need to either repackage it or figure out how you're going to use it when you open
Exactly.
that. And some of those do require more water. So can you talk for a minute about how you store water or what your water
Yeah.
situation
So
is?
we have a few different, like we have a few like 55-gallon drum containers.
Right.
We have a couple inside the house that are stored, and then we have a big giant, and it's huge. My husband found it at some yard sale because he's like an estate sale, garage sale junkie. It's like a massive, huge, it's like on this metal grid water thing. It probably holds, I would say, between 300 to 500 gallons. I have no idea. I'm so like,
I know what you're talking about, the
it's
big
massive.
balloon.
And
Yeah.
it sits in the garage, and he will empty it out once or twice a year, just like waters the trees with it or whatever. But that way we have water, like we probably will need to boil it and, treat it and clean it and stuff. But like that's on hand. And then we've got the ones inside that are a little bit probably more, a little fresher because Houston, come on,
Yeah.
with the temperature and stuff. But that's something that we make sure that we have on hand. And when there is a natural disaster, all of the bathtubs get filled up, and my husband, we go through and we fill up lots of, whatever containers we can find, we fill up with water, just because you never know when you're going to lose that access.
Yeah.
So
Well,
that's kind of
plus
what we
there
do
have
for
been a
water.
few times in the last couple of years where various parts of Houston have been under a boil order
Yeah,
because something happened and the water treatment plant wasn't able to deal with what was happening.
yeah, yeah. Exactly. You never know. Like it could be not associated with a natural disaster that you have no water. So yeah, it's something that we would probably like, that would last for a while. Like it's not super long term, but it would definitely get us for through a period of time. So
Sure, sure. And I think it's funny that you said there are some things in there that are not your favorites. My philosophy is always to try to have things that you will eat, mostly
yes,
because if you're the one who's cooking, lentils and your family's like, I hate lentils, like they're just not going to be happy with you. And you're already stressed enough. The last thing you need is somebody unhappy about the food.
very
Um,
true.
but so I also wanted to ask, do you also include things like storing extra spices? So we have seasoning to make the food taste good. Do we have a few treats? Do we have like nothing that you absolutely love? So it's like, oh, we don't have any dessert. I'll just go downstairs. Or well, we don't have downstairs as in
Yeah,
Texas, but I'll
yeah.
just go like nothing that's going to seriously attract you. But so do you include those things in your plan as well?
Yeah, we do. Like I have my youngest daughter. She's almost 15. Oh my gosh. Um, but she is a very picky eater. She's got a very sensitive gag reflex and palate, and just textures for her are very tricky. And so she pretty much lives on souped up protein shakes that we make with different shake mixes and different powdered herbs. And so I have a huge stock of all the shake mixes.
Wow.
That like it's pretty, you look at it, you're like, this is ridiculous, but I'm like, that will sustain her life.
Yeah.
And so yes, like we do, like there are specific things, I try to have, like me and my husband will eat anything. um but I've got kids that are pickier, and so like we make sure that we have something
Mm-hmm.
that they will consume. We have pets. That's one thing that I'm not
Oh, I
super.
was just going to ask you about that. Yeah. So what's the LDS philosophy when it comes to your pets?
I don't think that there's church policy on that, but just I think common sense would be making sure that you have some stored food. So like I think just out of habit, I always try to have like an extra bag. It's very rare that I run out of something and we're like, if I don't go to the store today, my dog is going to starve. Just
Yeah.
because of my habits is I always try to have extra backup. Like it really, like I'm not a very anxious person, but if I see that there's not an extra bag of dog food or cat food, like I'm like we've got to get it. So
Yeah.
I just always have, I don't have as long term. So sorry, Fido, if um, but I figure they can also eat off of us, like whatever we're not eating.
Yeah.
Worst case scenario. But I think if you do have pets, if you do have medical needs, like it's good to have, some of those things. Have a few extras. Like you might not have like a year supply or a 3-month supply of extra medication or pet food, but making sure that that's on your radar if that's something that is in your life, because not everybody has pets and not everybody has medication needs, but making sure you have extras in those areas, putting yourself, okay, supply chain gets cut off, or there's a hurricane, or, somebody loses a job. Like, what would you actually need?
Mm-hmm. And
To,
it sounds like this has become something over the decades that has really become a habit for you, that you're aware of what you have and that you're always making sure that you are staying on top of what's available, what's in your stock, so that you have what you need.
Yeah, it really has. It just becomes kind of a way of thinking. And so it's like if I go into my pantry and I see, not enough of this or not enough of that, like I'm like, I feel that urgency. And it's so funny
Yeah.
because like anybody else would look at that and like, Nicole, you have so much food. But like if I don't have the backup for the backup of certain
Mhm.
stuff, like it causes a little bit of like that urgency, like I better get to Costco fast or wherever I'm gonna go grab my stuff. And it does become a habit, and it becomes a way of thinking and perception. And because I've used it, because it has like played a huge blessing in my life, like I have, for lack of a better word, a testimony of having that store, because you never know what's going to happen.
Right.
Yeah.
And I love how you shared that it's not, I mean, my philosophy is the best time to prepare for an emergency is before there is one. So I always
Amen.
encourage, yeah, absolutely. But it doesn't have to be, a blizzard, a hurricane, a flood, or whatever. Like you said, it could also be that somebody has lost a job. It could also be like if you had surgery and you can't drive because it
Exactly.
was your right foot, and you have nobody else to drive for you. I mean, yes, we have Instacart these days, but that can get expensive. And even then, the grocery store may not have what you need. Like there are other reasons to be mindful about building some sort of a preparedness pantry.
Yeah. And it can, focus on the staples, focus on like, what is something, if you had to have just one thing to eat for the day, like what would that meal look like?
Mhm.
Because realistically, like humans, we can survive on one meal a day. Although like sometimes the thought of that is like, but think of that, like, okay, could I survive on a can of tuna or a can of lentils, or there's so many different things, and focus on that and just add a few extra to your cart when you're shopping, and start there, and then you can add on, and then just keep it in the rotation, right? You don't have to go crazy. Like there are some people, especially in our faith, that'll get like a ton of wheat or a ton of like raw beans, or like I wouldn't know what to do with 25 pounds of raw wheat. Like, sorry,
Yeah.
like I don't know
Unless
what
you
to do
have
with
a
that.
grinder and you know how to
Exactly.
soak it and make
Like
it.
there's some people
Yeah.
that would work great for, but I am not one of them. Like I hate cooking, so I'm all about easiness. And so like if I've got to grind wheat, like sorry, sister, that's not happening. So for me to go and buy that, like that, and some places will tell you that, like if you get on preparedness blogs, like they will tell you to buy that. But if it's not something one you're going to eat, or that how to prepare,
Yeah.
thankfully we live in a society that there are stuff that is relatively healthy. Like it might be like a yellow light on the Mira scale, um, for emergency only, but it can sustain you, and it can
Yeah.
do the job, um, as needed. So yeah.
And I also really appreciate your sharing about adding a little bit at a time. I think one place where people get really stuck is they all of a sudden realize that maybe this is a good idea, and they think they have to go out and spend like $1,000 on groceries. I'm like, I didn't even do that. It's just seriously, I don't think that's necessary. And the other thing is, if you do it a little bit at a time, a month down the road, 3 months, whatever, you look back and you're like, whoa, look at that. Look at what we have, because we very carefully and mindfully committed to a little bit at a time adding to this.
Exactly. And pay attention. You know what you buy. Most of us are we're creatures of habit, most of us,
Yeah.
right? And so there are going to be some staples that we know every time we go to the grocery store, we grab this or we grab that. Like when you see that that's on sale, if it's something that's, shelf stable, grab 2 or 3 extra. And,
Yeah.
and you can do it in a very economical way. There are, deals online. You can get digital coupons. Like just pay attention if cost is a concern, because like you said, it can get expensive if you try to do it all at once. And it can be a shock to your budget. And some people have that luxury that they can just go spend $1,000 and like, boom, here it is, we're done.
Mm.
Most of us don't, right? Most of us need to be mindful, and we can add in 20, 30, 40, 50 extra dollars a month, whatever your budget looks like, on building your store, and do it before the emergency, right? That's huge, because if you can swallow $50 a month, but if all of a sudden, like, the you see that hurricane in the Gulf, or that blizzard's coming, and you try to go to the store, number one, the stuff's not going to be there for you to buy, and number two, like, that's going to be a huge hit on your bank account if you're trying to buy all of that stuff, even if you're just trying to get through the next 2 or 3 weeks. Like, that can be expensive. So if you can just be mindful and pay attention to the patterns of the sales, and looking at that, you can really leverage your buying power, and leverage your your penny to stretch it as far as it can go, and have a good store that can serve you well.
And another tip that was shared with me by someone else was that if you have the opportunity to buy a certain amount of something in bulk and it's more than you want, the goal then is to teach your friends and neighbors to do it too.
Exactly. I
Get
love it. I
other
love it.
people on board to be doing this, and then go, hey, want to split this with me?
Yeah,
Because then everybody wins. So
exactly.
that's really great.
Yeah, and there's so many, like, great storage things too. The food savers that take air out, and
Yeah.
different canning methods that you can actually make your food last longer. You
Mhm.
can can chicken, you can can beef. Don't ask me how. I don't do it because
Pressure canner.
yeah, like my mother-in-law, and I've got friends that do that. I'm like, I'm not there yet. But like,
Yeah.
you can really, if that's something that brings you joy, you can learn how to do that. But there's so many, splitting a cow with a friend, right? Like,
Yeah.
I've had lots of friends that, like, hey, I've got this grass-fed cow, and you split that beef up, and it's only going to last so good long in your freezer, but you can cook up different parts and can it if you're really ambitious. I am not that.
Or even just having that means that you're not caught in the fluctuations at the
Yes,
grocery store because you got it
exactly.
at X amount. It's direct from the farmer, which honestly is sometimes less than the grocery store because the
Yep,
farmer's not paying the middleman. And so
exactly.
it's pass the savings right along to you. So that can be
Exactly.
the way to do it. Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah, there's so many ways that you can really get creative in your food storage, and make it work for how you live.
So I have two more questions for you.
Yeah.
One, as you learned to do this and as you began to have your family, did you teach your kids to do this too? And as they're moving out in the world, are they doing it?
So I've only had one. My oldest one is the only one that's left the nest so far. So she's a newlywed and in college. I don't know if she's doing that. I'm thinking, like, I haven't done it intentionally, but like, they see
Yeah.
how we shop. They see how we keep the pantry, and I think it's one of those behaviors that they naturally see. And right now, I know in her apartment, like, they don't have any storage, and they're
Uh,
getting ready to leave. Like, they're only there temporarily. So I think it's probably on her mind. But it hasn't been able to brought to fruition yet. Maybe after her husband's done with college, but I think they definitely have that mindfulness and the provident living, and being prepared.
That's awesome. That's such an important thing we should all be doing it, and we should all be teaching our kids how to do it. Like you said, the more self-sufficient we are, the better able we are to not only meet emergencies, but to support those around us. So I think
Exactly. Yeah.
that's really important. Okay, last question. If you had to make a comfort meal for yourself out of your pantry, what would you make?
Hey, can I use the freezer too?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
I was like, okay. I would totally make Salisbury steak and mashed potatoes and gravy.
Oh, that sounds really good.
Anything with gravy, like meat, gravy, and mashed potatoes, like, that is total comfort food. I do have Dr. Pepper in my storage, so I would probably sip on that a little bit. Um, we do have soda storage because that is important to my family. You said this was a no judgment zone, so
This
I'm
is a
taking
no
you up on that
judgment
offer.
zone.
Um, But yeah, I would say Salisbury steak, hamburger patties, and I even have dried onions and mashed potatoes
Oh, there you go.
and
So yeah,
gravy stock, beef stock. And so that's what I would make.
that's that. And so you've got all the pieces and parts
I
right
have
there.
all the pieces in place.
That's amazing. Well, Nicole, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your lived experience and your viewpoint. That's been really, really helpful. And it was, as always, it's great to talk with you.
You're so
And
welcome. I hope it was helpful and helped spark some ideas in
yeah,
others.
absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Well, folks, thanks so much for joining us. And I will share a little bit of information down below. So don't forget to check there while you're watching the video. And as always, in all you do, make today a healthy day. Bye, folks.